political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 103.9 LI News Radio.
Welcome to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is Steve Levy, the former Suffolk County executive, welcoming the people of Long Island to listen into your radio show. Remember, this is a live show. This is a live call-in show, so we're going to want to hear from you over the course of these 2 hours. 451-1039, just like the station, 103.9, 1039, 451-1039. We've got 4 segments. The first one, I'll spout off about what's on my mind. We're going to get into the second segment with Larry Levy, no relation. Larry was a former reporter for Newsday, then a member of the editorial board and columnist, now serves as a director of the Suburban Institute over at Hofstra University. He's a well-known commentator throughout Long Island, News 12 and many other media outlets. Then the third segment's Larry's going to stay on, and we're going to have Mike Watt, who is a conservative business leader here on the island from an entity called Long Island Inc. So we'll have some interesting discussion on the State of the Union and a lot of other controversial issues. The last segment, we're going to be joined by Robert Zimmerman, a committee man, a United States committee. You know, you have local committee people. He's a committee member on the national level. Very, very credible guy with gravitas. Has been on CNN, Fox, MSNBC quite a bit. So it should be an interesting day. Let's get into my little rant for the first 20 minutes or so. Again, you guys are welcome to call in at 451-1039. It's Super Bowl weekend, okay? This big game coming up tomorrow. Everybody's psyched up about it. It's become another American holiday a la Thanksgiving. But, you know, the talk over the last 2 weeks should have been about Peyton Manning. Is he going to get over the hump and, you know, get his second Super Bowl and be in the conversation for the greatest quarterback of all time? But it's been overshadowed. Overshadowed by what? Richard Sherman, who made these outlandish remarks right after the Seahawks beat the 49ers, and he deflected the pass in the very last play of the game. And he went off. And then the controversy abounded with, the people criticizing Sherman for being so self-centered, for going off on a tirade, attacking his opponent, et cetera, et cetera. And then one interviewer asked Sherman, well, what do you think of people calling you, thuggish and engaging in thuggish behavior? So what does Sherman do? Flips it all around and says, I'm the victim here. This is all racially tinged. Thug is the new N-word. And I'm just scratching my head here and thinking that since when is that the case? And instead of this guy apologizing for going off the handle and acting in such an irresponsible, immature manner, he again calls himself the victim. And we see so many within the media rallying behind him, which is really disgraceful. This has nothing to do with race. This was a matter of a guy acting very thuggish. And he's not the only one over the course of time in the NFL. Look at a guy, Bill Romanowski, white guy, linebacker, played in the 90s and the early part of this decade. The guy was a thug. I mean, the guy would hit his opponents, kick them when they were down, spit in their face. Real thuggish behavior. Look at a guy like John Rocca, the racist reliever for the Atlanta Braves back in, I think it was the 90s. That guy talked and acted like a thug. Now, look at Richie Incognito. The guy who's been, really peppering Jonathan Martin. A lot of people said that was overblown, but when you look at his steroid rage and you look at what he did to a woman at a party that the Miami Dolphins held, this guy acted like a thug. So, to turn around and say that is a new word for the N-word is absolutely ridiculous. Sherman should be ashamed of himself, and basically what this comes down to is sportsmanship. Do you want your kids to emulate a guy like Richard Sherman, who's a sore winner, who goes off against the guy he just defeated and tries to humiliate him? Or do you want him to emulate someone like Arthur Ashe, a gentleman, a man who conducted himself with dignity and was a champion, and that's what this is all about. So we can't be so politically correct in this world that we have to back down to the guys who try to make themselves victims all the time. Then there was during the 2-week hiatus, there's so much stuff going on at the NFL press conferences, and at one which really turned my head, Vernon Davis, a player, asked Roger Goodell, who's the commissioner, who's at the podium, why don't we have health insurance for our players? And I'm sitting back and I'm thinking, we're talking about Obamacare and trying to get insurance for people of lower means, 40+ million Americans unemployed, without insurance. And now we've got the NFL players saying, I don't get enough money. My $10 million contract is not enough for me to secure decent health insurance. Now, they might blow it on gambling, on extravagance, or whatever the case may be. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that the average player does not get, a $20 million contract and have a 15-year career. It might be an average of 3 to 4 years. But, you're doing okay, and you should be able to take care of yourself. And if you want it, then make it part of the negotiation for your contract. But again, to sit there and say, we're the victim, take care of us, again, somewhat disconcerting. Hey, one final thing on the NFL. I was just seeing again a debate yesterday on the term Redskins, and I am probably the least politically correct guy in the world. I really don't like political correctness, but this is a case where how do you justify this name? I was a student at St. John's Law School, and we shifted from the Red Men to the Red Storm without any really much of a big deal. Nothing wrong with Chiefs, nothing wrong with Indians, but Redskins, I can understand, and I think most other people can understand why it's offensive. Time to change that. Okay, let's shift to something else big in the news. My predecessors, Young and Young on this station, were talking about this police officer who was busted for targeting Hispanics. And it is really, really a sad episode for a number of reasons. One, it's just terrible that this guy was taking advantage of these individuals. But what's also disturbing is that a lot of the crazies out there, a lot of the extremists are going to say, there, we told you so. All of the cops in Suffolk County, they're out to get Hispanics, and they started the whole thing with this investigation that somehow Suffolk police officers were not taking the crimes against illegal immigrants seriously. It was all nonsense. It was all unfounded. There was no truth to that. But now you see this knucklehead, this despicable individual who was targeting Hispanics, probably because he looked for the North Carolina license plate, assuming they were illegal aliens, would shake them down, figuring they have no place to go. And that is truly unfortunate. But this guy was a rogue guy. There was no policy in place promoting this. In fact, it's just the opposite. And it's a good thing that they did catch this guy to set a lesson here. But for anyone to say that this is something endemic within the police department, it's absolutely false. This guy did the same thing that Jeffrey Conroy and, let me use those words, those thugs who attacked Marcelo Lucero that back in 2008 did. They were picking on people they figured would not be able to go to police. And by the way, that's why we've always had a policy. Whether you're here legally or not, you can come forward and your documented status will never be asked. But what's amazing is that the officer who did this for $100, shaking down for this, he was making, the reports were anywhere from $147,000 to $175,000 a year. You really scratch your head for that? You give up a wonderful position like this where 40,000 people a year are vying to get into that position. Really, really shameful stuff. But that segues into the high cost of government and having to pay out for many public employees, especially in law enforcement. So the Center for Cost-Effective Government, of which I am the executive director, has teamed up with Assemblyman Mike Fitzpatrick and a number of taxpayer advocates around the state. And we've gone up to Albany. We went up this week to Albany to put forth the most comprehensive mandate relief package in the state's history, and part of it is to clamp down on mandatory arbitration awards that give these salaries that are so outlandish. It would cap the salaries to 2%, as is presently the case in New Jersey. We'll see where this goes. It's still early on. We're waiting for that brave senator or that brave majority assembly member who will stand up like Assemblyman Fitzpatrick did to say, we can't keep going on with the type of pension system we have now that's unsustainable, the type of arbitration awards that come out every so often that are unsustainable, the disability awards that are unsustainable, the Triborough Amendment that gives automatic step increases even after the contract has expired. It's unsustainable. Let's see if we can finally make some progress on that front. And speaking of the high salaries in Albany and the mandates, in the news this week was talk again about the governor's budget and the fact that the governor is tying his so-called tax cut in future years to localities, capping their increases to no more than 2%. Now, he got bashed by the Association of Villages in Suffolk County just this past week. And you have to ask, why would the village officials be doing that? It's perfectly sensible for the governor to say, if I'm going to give a rebate on tax increases that you have to pay on a local level, I'm not going to give that rebate to a municipality that's spending like crazy, that is not doing its own share. If he were to do that, there'd be no incentive for the village or the town or the county to hold the line. They would just say, hey, we were going to increase by 2%. Let's increase by 4% now, because the governor's budget will help to defray some of that cost. That defeats the whole purpose of trying to get a tax cut. So the governor, I think, was sensible in saying that if we're going to give this, it's only going to go to those who do, in fact, hold the line. However, again, the disingenuous part of this is that the governor makes it sound like this is money in the bank to you. It's not. There have been a number of problems with these press releases from the governor's office that allow people to think that they're getting something and it's actually something much different. For instance, he's been claiming that there was a major tax cut that came into effect since he's been in office. In fact, it's the opposite. Taxes have been raised to the point where they have $2 billion more in tax revenue coming in than was the case before he was there. Why? Because he extended those high-level taxes on the upper end. Now, we did couple that with a very tiny cut to the middle class, but overall, it was a tax increase. But he presented it brilliantly, politically, to have everyone thinking there was a tax cut, and that's the way the media sold it. Then he said this past State of the State, we have a surplus, a $2 billion surplus, and we're going to give that back to the public. Well, hold on. There's no surplus there. The controller notes that there's no surplus. They're actually ending this fiscal year in a deficit, over $500 million. The governor's own budget office also concedes that. So how do you come up with this phantom surplus? Well, we think we're going to have a surplus a couple of years down the road based upon how revenues might come in and if the legislature does X, Y, and Z. Okay, so hold on. You don't really have a surplus now. You're just speculating there may be a surplus down the road, and we're going to build an election year tax cut around that. Hey, folks, this is not money in the bank. Don't start counting that as going to pay for Susie's shoes because it's not there yet. Number one, again, it's predicated on these villages and towns and counties holding the line to 2%, and then it's predicated on these same entities agreeing to consolidate in some fashion. And remember, of the 10,000 taxing jurisdictions in this state, in the last 5 years, maybe 2, maybe 3 have done anything on consolidation. So let's see where that all goes. But then this week, you saw another element of the saying one thing and another thing actually happening coming from the state level. And that's with PSE&G. Remember the press conference just a couple of months ago with the takeover. We're guaranteeing freezes in your bill. Well, not really the bill, in the rate. Well, all the headline said was, you're getting a rate freeze. You're getting a freeze on what you're paying for LIPA, PSEG, whatever you want to call it, okay? What they didn't say is that's only on the delivery side, not the supply side. Well, the delivery side never really changed. You're not saying much. You're not giving anything up when you say we're going to freeze the delivery side. That really doesn't change. It's always the supply side that's the big fluctuating element there. Oil, gas, they go up, they go down. You can't say, oh, well, we did our part. We froze your electric bill, and these other things related to the oil bill don't really count. That's nonsense. That's like going to a supervisor or a county executive and him saying, well, you know, your bill might be 10% higher than it was last year, but, you know, we really gave you a tax freeze. It was those darn pensions that went up. Hey, sorry, gang. You know, you've got to deal with the pension increase. You've got to deal with the Medicaid increase. You've got to deal with all of these mandate increases, and you have to cut in other areas so that you're protecting those people who pay the bottom line. So again, there has been, you know, one disingenuous statement after another. And before long, you know, you lose your credibility, just like you're going to be able to keep your doctor. Well, no, you're not. You're going to be able to keep your plan. Well, no, you're not. We've got a surplus. Well, really, we don't. You know, you're not going to see increases in your electric bill. Well, they just went up $17 in January and another $5 this month. Tell it straight. Tell it straight. And in the end, there'll be a lot more credibility. Now, speaking of telling it straight, we're seeing a lot of stuff in the news today about Chris Christie again. Did he tell it straight? Just a week or two ago, when he had his press conference saying that he had no part and he had no knowledge. Well, now we have this revelation, so to speak, by the attorney for one of the individuals that's on the hot seat saying Christie lied. And the headlines were blaring in the New York Times and all the major papers. Christie lied, memo or statement by lawyer, Christie lied. If you're going to make a statement like that, folks, you better have the proof and you better show the proof. You know, it was Christie lied, proof to follow. Now, if he did and he gave this order, he's got problems. He's probably toast. But it didn't say that within the statement. It just said that he knew of the closures. Well, was that he knew of closures thinking it was a shutdown for a study? Which is much different than saying, I've got the email where Chris Christie told his aides to shut down those lanes. Or he got the email as it was happening that we're shutting down these lanes for retribution for a political enemy. That's a whole different ballgame. But that wasn't said. There was no evidence shown to that extent. And yet it's out there. It's plastered everywhere. If this turns out to be untrue, how do you reel that back in? Wasn't there a responsibility for media to say, you're making this accusation, prove it? Didn't happen. Now, why would this lawyer do this? Well, maybe he wanted his name in the paper. It's free publicity. But also maybe it's because his client's on the hot seat, facing maybe 10 years in prison. You say anything to show that you're going to bring down the big fish to try to get immunity or to try to get some kind of reduction in how they'll come after you. So very, very disingenuous stuff that we've been seeing over the last few weeks. Time will tell whether it's true, but if you're going to say it, you should put it up and prove it at the same time. All right, we're going to be back in a few minutes. Please call us 451-1039. We're going to be joined by Larry Levy, former Newsday editorial board member, and now over at Hofstra University's Suburban Studies Department. We welcome him, and we welcome you back, folks. We'll be here. Okay, we're back. Welcome to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is Steve Levy, the former Suffolk County executive. And I'm joined by another Levy in this segment. No relation, but a friend. We go back many, many years, sometimes as foes on issues and sometimes in agreement. That's Larry Levy, who's the former member of the Newsday editorial board, back in its bigger liberal days, I will say, Larry, and now is in at Hofstra.
We were.
Oh, you were big-time liberal. Now, I mean, this is a paper that just endorsed Romney and I think Altshuler, so woo, this is...
But I don't know that necessarily has to do with liberal or conservative. I mean, every year I remember we endorsed about as many Republicans as Democrats.
Usually on a local...
We were opposed...
Because they were incumbents.
Well, maybe. I remember writing a lot of editorials for non-incumbents. I mean, we were, regardless of my personal opinion, we were opposed to raising the minimum wage. We were conservative on issues like... school prayer and
I know I got a hard time in the early years, and Newsday's changed since, but I was always in favor of tax cap, and they bashed the hell out of me for being in favor of tax cap. Now they're with it. Obviously, on the issue of illegal immigration, we had a big difference there, but we could talk about that stuff for 20 minutes alone.
Right.
But
why bring up the worst chapters of your administration, right?
Oh, not to the public out there. They might think it was the best.
Well, maybe some public, but
70% of it.
I always said when you were leaving office and people would call me up and say, "Oh, we're doing a story." I was not at Newsday anymore.
Right,
I was at Hofstra. They'd say, "Well, call it up and expect that." Everybody they interview is going to want to say bad things about you. And while I did, as you say, have some serious disagreements with some of the things you would say as opposed to necessarily doing on immigration and a few other issues, you did a lot of good things too. I know we're going to talk.
And now, ladies and
on.
gentlemen, you know why I brought Larry onto the show.
Well, no, I mean, but that's I had a show on a PBS show on that was taped at Channel 21 for 14 years.
And with Bob McMillan.
With Bob McMillan.
Point
counterpoint. It started out as the typical mud WrestleMania talk show that you would find anywhere. And over the years, we got tired of it. And we just decided that instead of arguing liberal to conservative, we just tried to bring on the two smartest people we could find on an issue. Sometimes it was three people who were more conservative against one person who wasn't, but it was really about finding some kind of middle ground, and that's...
Well, sometimes there is some common ground when we're talking about Long Island issues, and that really is your specialty these days. You're at Hofstra University.
My specialty is suburban issues, and
right.
we do work in China and London, and we're all over the world. We do use Long Island as a laboratory, and sometimes we're hired to actually evaluate programs on Long Island.
We're kind of a perfect laboratory because, we're kind of a purple area where people will vote, sometimes Democrat, sometimes Republican. It's kind of a mix where people tend to want to be fiscally conservative but more socially moderate, which I think 80% of the public is. It's not all conservative like the rural area. It's not all liberal like the city area. So it is a good test case. Now, given that, and you see things through the prism of suburbia, what do you think of the State of the Union address that we just went through this past week? And what parts of that may have an impact on Long Island and suburbs in general? And what should have been said that could help suburbs?
As a political document, and you have to look at any State of the State or even State of the Union speech as a political document in an election year, and this is Cuomo's election year, it was clearly aimed.
Well, you're talking about the State of State now.
Well, I'm talking about State of the State, but even a State of the Union speech.
Okay.
Any president who gives a State of the Union speech in either his election year or a congressional election year, which are usually referendums on the president anyways, even if he's not on the ballot, you have to look at those even year State of the whatever speeches in a political way, because it's a political season. Cuomo's rhetoric was clearly aimed at that moderate, middle-class, suburban swing voter. He brought up all the things that suburbanites love. He talked about education. He talked about the environment. He talked about economic development in a way that'll help small businesses. He talked about tax caps, and this is the lingua franca of suburban politics. The problem in analyzing the budget itself, and you got into some of this during your opening. I was going to call it the rant affectionately, but your opening segment, that some analysts are having problems with the numbers adding up. That it's one thing to talk about encouraging governmental consolidation, which is absolutely essential in the suburbs, if you're going to run things as efficiently as possible and keep taxes as low as possible. And I think that in an expensive area, there's only so low you're going to go, but you still have to do everything you can. But if you're going to claim savings, if you're going to say that you'll get your tax cut if a government consolidates, is I wouldn't
disingenuous,
call it,
I think.
Well, I was going to say I wouldn't call it disingenuous, because it's clearly trying a carrot and stick approach, but you can't count on it for your next property tax bill.
But also, let's talk about, and we're talking to Larry Levy. This is Steve Levy.
I'm the Larry Levy from Hofstra University.
Larry Levy, no relation, but Larry, formerly of Newsday, now with Hofstra University, who concentrates on suburban studies. I think he was misleading also with the whole pre-K talk. De Blasio starts it. Well, actually, Obama started it in his last State of the Union. For his legacy, we're going to have pre-K for a universal pre-K. Never says how we're going to pay for it.
Right. Well, you're not saying that we shouldn't have.
I am indeed saying that. Look to see if it works. Now.
Wait, Steve. You're entitled to your own opinion.
Morning,
but not your own facts.
Come on, Larry.
There are
studies that show it works for the first fourth till fourth grade, and then it all dissipates.
Right, because then you're not doing what you need to do from fifth grade.
Okay,
so you
we
shouldn't
spent
do
all
this.
this money to get to fourth grade, and then from fourth grade it totally dissipates. So let's keep spending the money to see if it's going to work. But wait, really.
There's no dispute that we need to.
There absolutely is dispute. There's absolutely is dispute, and beyond that,
not among anybody who's got.
Oh, that's just elitist. That's pure
anybody
Newsday,
who's studied
liberal elitist to say
your own words,
that the only that you have to spend this money and it works. And call in, folks, if you want to chime in on this.
Your own words.
451-1039.
It works for a certain number of years. So the problem isn't with the pre-K, the problems with what we're doing after that.
Well, the point is there's cultural things.
No, not a cultural thing.
Pressures on kids that they go different ways.
Oh, stop.
What is different in the fifth grade than the fourth grade?
Parents can pick any pre-K they want. The idea is to make it easier for them to pick a pre-K.
The point is, if you're and what I was getting to with the numbers.
I usually don't argue, but this is silly.
But it's spirited debate.
I was agreeing with you saying, boy, pre-K, it helps up through fifth grade. I'm saying, yeah, that's right, it does. So what's the argument here?
There have been different studies, some showing no benefit. The ones that do show a benefit stop at 4th grade. But I was going to get to
pre-K.
Let me
is
just
not
get to this point.
necessarily daycare. I bet you show me those studies, and I'll show you those are daycare.
There's no
studies.
doubt. But Head Start is another one that was going to change the world. And it hasn't,
because we didn't follow through.
Oh, so it's just the Head Start for the first years. Then we need phase 2 and 3 and 4.
Yeah,
there's
a problem with
big spending programs that in the end don't work. They don't work. I'll be happy to say, let's spend $2 billion on something works. But here's what I was going to get to.
Okay.
Now, de Blasio was saying, let's raise taxes on the high earners to pay for it. And at least that, I disagree with it, but at least that would get recurring revenue. So Cuomo comes in a state of the state. And this is what we're
now you're right. Now we agree.
Okay, we're going to bond $1.2 billion, and that's going to solve the problem. And even his commissioner.
That's a technology bond. That's different.
But that's what he was saying. That was going to go toward pre-K. And it was the technology bond for pre-K. And that was the only money he put up for pre-K.
Well, actually,
and then you had King.
You're right,
who
for a
came in and
different
said
reason.
it would be $1.5 billion a year.
The technology bond was supposed to be to build broadband and help schools get the computers they needed. But suddenly it became part of, well, if they want to use it to build pre-K classrooms, they could do that too.
Well, I think that was a way for the governor to say, I'm with you,
but
Mayor, and I won't have to give you your tax increase. But we've got Sarah from Brookhaven who wants to chime in.
Who's Sarah?
Well, Sarah's going to tell us. I don't know.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. You're with us. You're with Larry Levy and Steve Levy.
Levy and Company.
Are you there, Sarah?
Yes, Sarah, yes.
How are you? How do you want to chime in? What do you want to talk about?
I'm against the pre-K. I'm actually a mother of 2. My youngest is graduating from high school next year. And when she graduates, I got to get out of New York. I can't afford it. I mean, it's just insane. We can't afford it anymore. We've tried and tried, but with these property taxes, it's just impossible.
Well, I think you're one of those individuals Larry was talking about.
Why are you opposed to pre-K programs? I'm trying to understand that.
Because everything costs money. Where's the money coming from? I mean, my kids went to pre-K. I had to pay for it. I work full-time. My husband works full-time, and we are barely getting by.
Wouldn't you have rather not paid for it? I mean, I don't understand.
Well, we'd all rather not pay for stuff, Larry.
You had to pay for it.
That's socialism.
Wouldn't it be better if you didn't have to pay for it, and people who were earning less money got a benefit from requiring people who make a lot more money to pay a fairer share? I don't think that there's anything wrong with that.
Well, it all depends on what Long Island. Okay, $100,000, you're barely getting by.
Right,
that's the reality.
That's true.
Okay,
that's true.
So you're not going to get nationally or anything like that, any kind of subsidies. So because that's considered higher income nationally. So I don't understand.
But we're talking New York State, and would you have? Let me give me in theory, just in theory, and I'm not really arguing with you. I understand. I respect your position.
Right.
But if somebody said, we're going to take people who literally earn $1 million a year, and we're going to raise their taxes incrementally, and we're going to use the money.
You know what? That is like you're living in a fantasy land, because these millionaires hire the best lawyers, the best accountants. They are never going to pay more than they want to pay. That's the reality.
Well, but they do.
They have better lawyers and better accountants than the government does, because they're making a tremendous amount more money working privately. So if they're, I don't understand this whole 1% thing. They're never going to pay more taxes.
Well, Sarah, that's going to be a point for a show. We're going to do a whole show on that coming up in the near future. Thanks for the call. We appreciate your input. We're being joined now by Joe from Montauk. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Yeah, how you doing, Steve?
Very good. You're here with Steve Levy and Larry Levy.
Hi, Joe.
Larry from Hofstra University Suburban Studies.
Well, I've met Steve on a few occasions. Steve marches in the parade in Montauk, and I happen to
I'm doing the wave right now.
But anyway, I want to get to the pre-K thing. You're talking about should the 1%ers pay more for the pre-K and stuff. We have equal opportunity in this country. We don't have equal outcome. Okay? If somebody works hard, or even if they get lucky, that's good for them. Okay? When my wife and I sent our daughter to pre-K, but we sent our daughter to pre-K and we paid for it because we thought it was a good thing for her. Other people didn't pay for it because they didn't want to. This is choice.
But can I tell you, I never did pre-K. Larry, let me ask you this. What about
Larry? People who literally can't afford it?
So what if they can't? Let me ask you this. What if they don't go? I didn't go to pre-K. Did you go to pre-K?
Look how you turned out.
Well, that bad example.
I mean,
you're right. You're right. No, but wait, let me ask you this, Joe. Let me make this point. I mean, there was a time we had the most majestic educational system in the world. We cleaned everyone's clock. We didn't have 9-hour days at school. We didn't have round-the-calendar school. We didn't have pre-K. Now we've fallen behind. I think it's because of lower standards and lack of discipline and other reasons. But now everyone's saying to catch up, we have to have full-year kindergarten. We have to have extra hours in a day, and we need pre-K.
Absolutely.
And I'm saying that's absolutely not true because we excelled
And you have
in the prior ways. We excelled before without this stuff, without spending all that money.
It was another world, and you need to prepare.
It was
kids
another
for it.
world we had discipline,
Right.
where you had standards, and you don't have that
even
today,
back
and
in
that
the day-
doesn't cost money.
And even Joe back in the day decided that preschool was an important
And
thing.
that was an option for him. But it's not mandated for everyone else to pay for it, especially when you have no evidence that it really works.
But you see, you keep going back to that, and it's just not true.
It is
that
true.
there's no evidence it doesn't work.
Look,
If it
All
worked,
the
we would have
evidence
all the-
is that
we
it
would have
works.
had all of this upward mobility from these folks who went through these programs, and it hasn't borne out. Joe, any final points?
But that's just not true.
It is true.
Yeah, look,
you have just as much poverty today and you did in just before the Great Society. What were you saying?
Look, guys, what we've gotten away from is we've gotten away from parental involvement. We've gotten away from discipline. And, you said we used to have the best school system in the world, the envy of everybody in the world, and now we're adding things that aren't doing any good. It's time to turn around and go back to what we did well.
What are we adding? I'm just curious. Again, I'm not arguing with you, but what are we adding that you don't like?
First of all, pre-K is not mandated. Neither is kindergarten.
Not yet. Not yet it's not.
But not yet it's not. And every time they mandate it, it costs the taxpayers more money. I understand that. But why don't we get back to what we did well?
I agree.
Why don't we put some discipline back in the schools? Why don't we give this kid, when you suspend the kid, you don't give him an in-school suspension. You throw his butt out. When they're not doing the right thing, you don't socially promote them. You put them back a grade. I mean, this is we've done this to ourselves over the last 20 years, and it's just not working.
All right, Joe. Listen, we thank you very, very much for your points. Larry, come on, get the last word on that. I can't.
No, I'm not sure what that necessarily has to do with educating kids. You're talking about an individual circumstance. I don't think anybody argues that there needs to be discipline in classrooms, but the way what kids need to know now, how they need to know it, is so much different than when we went to school. It's not even close. And if we don't catch up to that,
the basics are still the basics.
No, they're not. The basics are not even the basics.
You don't. I'll even say this. Listen,
foreign languages,
you need computers
languages.
in this world today. But you never needed a computer to teach a kid how to add. You never needed a computer to teach a kid how to read. You do need computers.
Teaching a kid how to add and subtract gets them to first grade.
And in my case, in your case, it got us to 12 grades in college.
And somebody who could,
in my case, law school.
Who somehow
I never had computer
10th
classes.
grade and could add and subtract and decided to drop out, could get a job where they could support their family. It doesn't exist anymore. And we need to do everything we can to prepare our kids. If you need to establish more discipline, sure. One of the things I did agree with Cuomo is, let's go a little slowly on this. Let's not try to bust $1 billion in there all at once. Let's try some models. Let's see what's actually working. And if my only problem is that it works for the first 5 years, man, I'll take that anytime and then concentrate on the next 5 years.
Well, I'll commend him on that too, Larry. I think he had a tactic here in saying, look, I got a lot of pressure with de Blasio pushing on me to give him permission to raise the tax and make this fait accompli. He couldn't just ignore that. So he had to do something, right. And I think this was his way of slowing it down.
Let me ask you a question. And again, you're a big home rule guy. Why shouldn't if de Blasio feels he has a political mandate, you can make the case he does, you could look at the number of people actually voted and maybe...
And he got a mandate out of it, there's no doubt.
Well, he got a mandate of the people who voted, which was not a majority of the people in the city. But, whether he had the mandate or not, he was elected, and he wants to stake his political career on being correct about that. Why do you have a problem with de Blasio, if he can get a majority of the city council, taxing New York City residents.
I don't necessarily do.
But that's what this is about.
No, but it's
de
about
Blasio doesn't want to tax everybody in the state. He wants to attack.
As a home rule guy, I really don't care if a locality, and we see this all the time with county executives, they want to increase their sales tax. I never did, but some do, and they get blocked in the state level. I'll tell you why that happens is a guy who served for 3 years in the state legislature. The state legislators and the governor know there's only so much money people can give out, and they always look themselves. The same thing with the cigarette tax. If there's going to be a tax, Larry, that's going to come for cigarettes, the state wants to impose it and doesn't want the localities to impose it because there's only so much people can give out. And that's the way they look. That's my experience, at least. Those guys
Cuomo
say,
already did a millionaire's tax on
right, and now
people,
he said, now if I hit them again, now I'm starting to get into the point where I'm really oversaturated. In California, where they're paying 13% state income tax.
Let's say both of us agree with Andrew Cuomo's position that either you don't need the tax in New York City or it could do real harm to the economy. Mm-hmm. And New York City is the economic engine of the state, and if you hurt New York City, let's say we all agree on that.
Yeah.
We could argue it, but let's say we agree on that. Why doesn't New York City, through its elected representatives, have the right to hurt themselves?
Yeah,
that's a good question here.
It is a very good question, and there is a cap as to how much of a tax you could put on without having to go through the state. And this is something that we used to have with all the time. The sales tax, for instance, they extend it every 2 years. Well, why isn't it just permanent? Why do you have to go back? Because they want you to come back every 2 years.
That's
on your knees saying, please
give
us, and then they leverage you and they get you, and that's the way they keep their power. That's the way they get their contributions. You know the deal. You've been there a long time. All right, we're wrapping up this segment. Thank you, Larry Lee. Larry's going to stay with us for the next segment. We're going to have Mike Watt from Long Island Inc. To speak with us as well. You're listening to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. We want you in the public to call us. It's your radio station, 631-451-1039 with Steve Levy, Larry Levy, and Michael Watt in our next 20-minute segment. Thanks and stay tuned.
Political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
Welcome back to the show. This is Steve Levy, former Suffolk County executive, here at the Airport Center at MacArthur Airport in Ronkonkoma, live on the Super Bowl weekend, and we want you all to call in at 631-451-1039, and we're joined in this next segment again by Larry Levy, formerly of the Newsday editorial board and presently over at Hofstra University Suburban Studies Institute, and Michael Watt, who is from two organizations, one called Long Island Inc. and another called Links, which is a consortium of Long Island professionals. Is that young professionals,
Mike? It's an association for young professionals. One of the reasons why the young people 22 to 35 on Long Island really get the short stick on so many occasions is because they're not organized and they're not part of the process. So what we're trying to do with Links is really get them involved, get them engaged in what's going on so that they can make educated stances on subjects and issues and be a part of the process so that maybe the elected officials can look out and see that there is support for some of the things that Long Island needs.
Now so much
of very important, Steve, by the way. Young people are obviously the lifeblood of a sustainable economy, one that'll last more than just 3 or 4 years with each cycle. But young people are also very, very busy and don't pay attention and aren't interested in politics. They aren't interested in getting involved in the sort of things that might move public officials to do the right thing, to make the kind of changes to make Long Island more appealing to young people. So
what they say
if Michael succeeds, it would be a good thing.
Yeah, it's like when you're young, you really have to have that first kid and that first paycheck before you start really paying attention. And that's why seniors disproportionately hold so much clout vis-a-vis the young folks. But we did see that change a little with Obama, who inspired young people to get out, and then you go to the off year and it totally drops off.
Right.
But But let's talk about the conditions here on Long Island for young people, where we are economically, what we have to do to keep these young people. Because I've said it so many times, young people, they're living in mom and dad's garage or attic apartment. They're now 28 years old. They want something lively. They'll go to Brooklyn and room with somebody, or Manhattan, spend a fortune, but they have nightlife. They can walk around to a bar to pick up a bagel, slice of pizza at 2 in. You don't get that here in Long Island. We're trying to change that. It's very, very hard. But there's been some good news over the last few months with some project. I shouldn't use the word project. I do that all the time. Some proposals that have been given the green light. So, Mike, where do you think we are right now? What do we have to do for our young people and our economy as a whole on Long Island?
Well, the first thing we have to do is get them engaged in the process. I mean, we've all been to a number of panel discussions and think tank things, or the future of Long Island, the future brain drain problem in Long Island. And I was at an event last year where they spent an hour talking about the brain drain problem and what to do about it. And I looked around the room, and there was 3 people under 40 in the room. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to discuss the future of Long Island, you have to have the future as part of the process.
Larry, what do you see the conditions of Long Island right now, economically, for our middle class, for young people? Where do we stand?
We went through a really, really awful time of it during the Great Recession, and we're just coming out of it. But we're coming out of it fairly rapidly. The unemployment rate is down now to about 5%, which isn't great historically for Long Island, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was.
8-9%, right?
Yeah, it's just unheard of numbers for Long Island, which at one time was considered recession-proof because we had the defense industry, we had expansion of single-family residential communities. The other thing is that we're starting to whittle through the backlog of foreclosures, though it's going to continue to be a drag on the economy for a while now because it's going to take a while. Good news, organizations like the Regional Economic Development Council, which are bringing together people who haven't talked before. I'll give one example: Stony Brook and Hofstra. We did nothing together that I knew of. Some people would argue we probably worked at cross purposes, but I wouldn't argue that now that I work at Hofstra. Now, Hofstra, Stony Brook, Cold Spring Harbor, Brookhaven National Lab, Farmingdale State are working together on projects that, over the past 3 years since the council came into play, have produced 6,000 or 7,000 jobs. I mean, that's documented. That's analyzed.
Yeah, and we should point out, what these entities do is look for career-oriented jobs, and that's really, really significant. And we should give kudos to Larry. Not many people, and we're speaking to Larry Levy, not many people would know this outside of the insiders, but Larry actually wrote the proposal, or at least a big part of that proposal.
I wrote a part of it, yeah.
That went to the governor's panel to get the money for Long Island. It was a very competitive process,
we've gotten about
very well.
$250 million with a B dollars in the last 3 years. And I mean, people can argue whether the right businesses got it, the right communities got it, but a lot of businesses and a lot of communities got it. There was a focus on both the high-tech, unpronounceable new processes and that involve bringing the business world and the academic world together, looking for ways to commercialize or monetize research and discovery, but also in places like by Ronkonkoma, that undeveloped, underused area near the train station, Wyandanch,
right outside our window.
Places like that.
Right.
But more to the point of what Michael was talking about, what's changed on the island, even if we haven't seen a lot of movement yet, is that there is a consensus that we need to create places, spaces, like little Brooklyn neighborhoods where people under the age of 40 would like to live.
Well, one of the impediments we have out here in Suffolk is a lack of sewers.
Right.
In Nassau, we have 100% sewers. In Suffolk, it's maybe 27-30% is sewer, the rest is not. And because of our water table, you can't have that high density without the sewers, and we need more sewers. And Mike, I know you've been a proponent of a lot of these developments, such as what we're going to see out here in Ronkonkoma, what we'll see in Wyandanch, and the key, what we've seen in Patchogue, the key is sewers. Is it not?
Absolutely. And what's really amazing is, and I remember you at the HIA luncheon at some point saying,
Industrial Association.
I'm sorry, Hop Hog Industrial Association saying, I'm going to use the S word, and there was a gasp because I want to hear you talk about sewers.
That's my legacy, right? That we can make a lot of jokes about that. My legacy went to blank.
Yeah, that Suffolk still isn't sewered to the extent that it has to be sewered. But to Larry's point, we have to start fishing with the bait that the fish want to eat. And the next generation of Long Islanders, they want that downtown urban environment until they're about 35. And what I used to tell my students when I taught at Nassau and Dowling, because to a person, they didn't expect to be establishing roots on Long Island. I asked every semester, who plans on living here? And I'd say, what you hate about Long Island when you're 25, you love about it when you're 35. And the trick is to keep me here for those 10 years. And that's what we're trying to do with these downtown environments.
And you can do everything that Michael was talking about, everything that the consensus, the thought leaders, you may call them the elitists, have decided we need to do to retain young people, without changing 85 to 90% of our landscape.
Right.
Single family.
You can redevelop areas like Pilgrim State.
Levittown, we have relationship with a university in China and also with the South China Seas Institute.
Being Hofstra.
The National Center for Suburban Studies at Hofstra. And
this is Larry Levy.
And they'll send delegations over, and all of them want to know about Levittown, but not as an example of a successful, vibrant place that you'd want to replicate or imitate. They want to know why it failed, why it doesn't work anymore. In their minds, it doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Well, tell that to 3 million people that it failed, but anyway.
Well,
it no longer serves
you
the
look
purpose.
at the
it's changing demographics, obviously.
If you drive down the street of Levittown, the streets are absolutely clogged because most of the houses have two families in them now when you're not supposed to.
Well, it was the place that you'd go to hang your hat when 80% of the population on Long Island was driving into the city or taking a train into the city to work. Now 80% of the population is working on Long Island.
That's right.
It's what it was.
There's no public transportation anywhere nearby. If you were going to build Levittown today, you would do it differently. You would make sure there was a train station. You would make sure that there was a downtown clustered around it. You would make sure that there was some rental housing for people who don't want to own. There's been a tremendous demographic shift that goes beyond Long Island, but which is hurting Long Island particularly. Young people are not getting married.
Right.
So
they're
often
not looking for
or
a
as early.
standard 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with the wife and kids. They're looking for an apartment. They hang their hat there, and then they go out and hang out with their buddies.
That's right. And the other shift is that central cities are becoming more attractive places to live. Not just for the hot
crime rate is
restaurants.
down.
Crime's down, and there's general agreement that certainly up through elementary school, the education, kids can get a good free public education there. Whereas when we were kids, Steve, and you're probably a little bit younger than me, but basically, and Michael, when we were kids, nobody wanted to send their kids to city schools. If you live in the city, you sent the kids to private schools. Yeah. So there's less of a reason for the young families to move out. Maybe by middle school and high school, if you can't get into the Bronx High School of Science or Stuyvesant, you may want to come back.
Definitely, it's a changed area. And if folks, you want to chime in on this, we're at 631-451-1039. We want to hear your calls. We're here with Larry Levy from Hofstra University Suburban Studies Institute and Michael Watt from Long Island Inc. And Mike, I want to segue. We're talking about sewers. I every week do my who had the best week, who had the worst week, and I'll segue into that right now. I think the guy who had the best week this week was Steve Ballone because he did a press conference on nitrogen going into into our aquifers and stuff, and he got tremendous press on it. It was really, really good press. But then I looked to see, what is it they're proposing? There's really nothing there. They're just identifying the problem. But then when I read the media reports, it's like, well, they're finally identifying the problem that we need sewers. I'm saying, hold on. We've been talking for 10 years about the need for sewers. And in fact, we passed a law in 2011 that takes hundreds of millions of dollars that are in a reserve account and are going to actually pay for sewers and septic systems and Mastiff and Shirley. And this one, Concommon Development, is going to be funded in large part from that system. So, he was my winner of the week, and the good press he got on that. You could talk about the sewers or whatever, but did you have a winner of the week or a loser of the week here on Long Island?
Well, I had a winner and a loser, and ironically, they're tied to the same thing. I think the winner of the week was Simon Properties. They bought the Sarah Wire property from...
I was going to say the same
thing. I know who the loser of the week is.
Well, the loser of the week, in my opinion, is the residents of Nassau County and the town of Oyster Bay.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the present owner of that facility tried to build a mall there for 17 years.
No, I think they're winner A. If Simon's won, then Taubman's 1A because they're finally done with that disaster.
Oh, right. I mean, yeah, it's funny. I was going to do the Simons, which owns Roosevelt Field Mall, which owns the Whitman Mall, for 15, 18 years, poured tons of money, created civic groups, encouraged real civic groups to oppose the redevelopment of a polluted brownfield site into a fourth generation mall. And unless you've been around the country, you don't realize how old and shabby, no offense meant to existing, our places are compared to the newer stuff. And I saw Lee Koppelman quoted in the paper saying the last thing Long Island needs is a new mall. I don't know if that's true or not, but clearly Taubman, which fought this for years and years and years, got clobbered and finally having to give up the ghost. Another winner, of course, was John Venditto, the supervisor of Oyster Bay, who led the fight to stop this. But I
Oyster
also
Bay, Smithtown, very much alike. They know.
They have the lands of knowledge.
That's not a good thing, by the way.
Right. Right.
It depends on your perspective.
Right. But they're winners only. They're winners
only.
No, it's not a good thing. Trust me.
But those homeowners seem to like it because they keep saying yes to those guys who continue that status quo.
But there's an opening here.
Yeah.
When I was on the editorial board, we supported the Sarah Wire site because we didn't see anything else in sight. I got personally beat up by some of the alternative press for having sold out. I don't know what they thought I was.
The pocket of developers.
Whatever it was. I got a little taste of what I would give out to politicians as a journalist myself.
Welcome to the club. Doesn't feel too good, huh, Larry?
They must have thought I was Steve Levy, not Larry Levy. But, we have an opportunity here. Maybe we time to call the bluffs of the people, the residents who... let's see what happens in 3 years when somebody proposes a mixed-use development. They say no to that, too.
Right.
As if we're going to make a park out of this. We're going to make an open space.
Well, we had a couple of approvals of late, right, Mike? Over in Huntington Station.
We got Huntington Station. Don Monte's group, Renaissance Downtowns, is going to be redoing Huntington Station. What's really interesting about that is Don does a thing called crowdsourced placemaking. And what he does through his organizations, he reaches out to the community, finds out from them what they want done with that defined area, takes what's feasible, puts it into a plan, and now he's got buy-in from the local community, and he brings that plan to the town board, and that makes it more feasible for the town, elected officials in the town to approve what's being proposed. And it's so anathema to how things have been done on Long Island since forever that I think that's
top down doesn't work. Top down just doesn't.
We're talking about keeping our young people, and that involves getting good jobs, and whether or not you're going to get good jobs depends on the economy, and how the economy runs depends on various policies. And the policy that was touched upon by both the governor and the president is the big wave for push for an increase in minimum wage. And boy, are people divided on this issue. And Mike, you come from representing a lot of businesses out there.
I work with a lot of retailers, a lot of mom and pop retailers, and I think this minimum wage thing is really, it's like a magician's trying to divert your attention. These mom and pop businesses are dealing with all kinds of inspectors coming out of the woodwork. I mean, I was working with a guy, he got fined last month because his fire extinguisher wasn't painted the right shade of red. That's $500 out of his pocket. So this minimum wage comes on top of all these other little fees, and we met with a county official about another fee. They were going to quadruple the fee. From $125 to $500. And the guy turns to me and says, what's $500 to one of your guys? And that's the mindset. Apparently if you own your own business, you're printing money and you're hoarding it to yourself because you're only paying them $7.25 an hour. And every little thing, every little great idea that an elected official comes up with, on its own, maybe not the end of the world, but when you start piling them together, it becomes very onerous, and it really discourages these people from taking the risks that they have to take to own their own business.
Well, I tend to agree that there is a business bashing element out there to a great degree. But I have to say, on this issue, and I'm as fiscally conservative as it comes on many issues. I wrote an op-ed to the Washington Times a couple of months ago that subsequently the same view was adopted by Charles Krauthammer, Bill O'Reilly. Not that they read my article.
Sure they did.
I'm sure they did it. Come on. But I actually said, conservatives should be, fiscal conservatives should be in favor of the minimum wage increase because there's so much incentive now in this entitlement society to stay home and not work. We'll give you a phone. We'll give you an Obama phone. We'll extend your unemployment benefits for 99 weeks. Plus, we'll double the number of people on food stamps. And, some studies have shown, it's the equivalent of $40,000, $50,000 now for staying home with Section 8, this and that. I want to give encouragement and incentive for people to work. And when it's $7 an hour, you're sitting there saying, let's see, I stay home and I make $40,000 from all the benefits I get, or I work full time and I bring home $20,000.
All right, but then you know what, Steve? Then it's up to the business owner to raise that wage, okay? Because everyone talks about Henry Ford. He paid them $5 a day or whatever it was, $5 a week, and that's what created the middle class, and that's what helped him. So he had to pay that wage because his work conditions were so deplorable. That was the only way he could get people to work there. And he had such high turnover that he had to pay that $5, whatever it was, to get the people there. And you have to let the market dictate what's going to happen. Otherwise, okay, we're going to tell you now what you're going to pay your workers, and next thing you know, we're going to tell you that they're only allowed to work 30 hours a week, and then we're going to tell you you have to make sure there's
rose
petals.
But would the market say, hey, let's allow 13-year-olds to work, 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week?
The research is all over the place. You can find economists who'll say it helps, economists will say it hurts, economists will say it helps when the economy's in a certain situation, they'll say it hurts when it's in other situations. I'm not an economist. If somebody cares what I think, I have no problem with raising the minimum wage. On Long Island, the minimum wage has very little impact.
Because most people are making more than it. Anyway.
You have to.
Right.
And that's the market that you're talking about.
Right. And there's something to be said for that. But I think, and this is where conservatives are starting to, I don't want to say wake up because it sounds pejorative, but are coming to embrace the idea of either raising the minimum wage, or the earned income tax credit is another way to do it, or others, I don't know if conservatives tend to, but find some ways to increase the value of working, picking up health care if you're working. Whatever it is, they've come to realize that we've got to do something about what is often referred to as income inequality. Because who gets hurt the most? Who gets hurt the most by the middle class not growing, by poverty increasing? It's the small businessmen that Michael are talking about.
Absolutely.
If you put extra money in the pocket of the middle class, the working class, the so-called lower class, it goes to the pizza bar.
As long as that money gets to them in a productive means, and not as you should care, because if it's
put it in my pocket or my bank account, who cares?
It makes a big difference if it's an extension of unemployment benefits or if it's an investment in technology and education that has a payback to you.
Yeah, but you don't want to have them go to preschool, so we're not going to get anywhere here.
Oh boy, I wish I had Larry Levy for another hour here.
Levy and Levy.
But Larry's going to sign off in this segment. Mike Watt is going to be back for our next segment, and we're going to be joined by Robert Zimmerman, a Democratic committeeman who's been on CNN, MSNBC quite a bit. Larry, thanks so much for
having me.
Making it such an intriguing 20 minutes. We'll be right back with you, folks. 451-1039. All right, welcome back. This is our last segment. Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is former county executive Steve Levy on this Super Bowl weekend. We are live, and we're asking for our members of the public out there to chime in if you so desire. 631 451-1039. We have in studio Michael Watt from Long Island Inc., more right of center, I would say, and a counterbalance. Joining us on the phone right now is a United States level Democratic committee person, Robert Zimmerman. You might have seen Robert or heard Robert on CNN, on Fox, on MSNBC. A great deal of gravitas behind this gentleman. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you, and congratulations on the success of your show, Steve. I'm delighted to be with you.
Thank you so much. We're really happy to have you, Robert, because in this segment, we want to talk about some issues that are topical, but also maybe a little bit controversial, and get our folks out there in the public to chime in as well. I think we'll have some nice spirited conversation here, maybe a little debate. We'll maybe agree on some things, disagree on things, but I want to go right into it with the President's State of the Union this past week. A lot of little bullets that I jotted down, but one of them that came up, and I want to get your perspective, is the war on women that keeps coming back. It seems to me, and I was once a Democrat, now I'm a Republican. You are a very loyal, stalwart Democrat. Sure. What I see, one of the reasons I left Democratic Party is I saw the party concentrate, basically carving the electorate into different factions. And then whether it's women, minorities, young people, gays, and saying, you are victims. These other guys are trying to hurt you and hold you back. And we in the Democratic Party will be your saviors. Vote for us. And sometimes it's legit, and sometimes it's fabricated. And I think this latest thing with the war on women is somewhat manufactured. Certainly, there's still an element of sexism that's out there. But I see what happened to Huckabee this last week, where he was saying something like this. Mike Huckabee, the former governor of Arkansas, said, Democrats try to make it appear that women can't control themselves and need government subsidies. He wasn't saying that himself, but the media came out and immediately said Huckabee was saying this. And then you had the president and some of his minions continuing. Women are continuously underpaid as victims, and you see the studies, 77 cents of every dollar. But do they factor in the fact that at some point women may get off the track because they have children and then come back into the workforce 5 or 10 years later, or that women are going in traditionally lower paid jobs than men in service areas? What are your thoughts on this? Is this a real war on women?
It's not just a war on women. This is an issue that rises above Democrat and Republican debate. If it's not Democrats who are saying there's a war on women, it's not Republicans who are saying women are doing fine. It's women who speak out in almost every national election and give an enormous vote towards the Democrat over the Republican, especially in suburban communities that we live in, Steve.
Well, there's no question.
Let me finish my point.
Sure.
They're on the front lines dealing with this issue. Whether a woman takes time off for child raising or whether a woman comes back into the workforce later, there's no rationale, no excuse for women being paid less than men for the same comparable
wait a
work.
minute, Robert. But if the studies show that when they get out of college, a man and a woman till they're about age 30, are making about the same amount of money. And then are you saying that if a woman or a man takes 5 years off, that when they come back in 5 years, that they should be at the same salary that their counterpart was who stayed working on the path for those past 5 years? That doesn't make any sense.
No, what Robert's saying, if I can jump in, right? Because
let Robert speak for himself. Then I want Mike to chime on that too. Again.
It does make sense that, and this is the real issue. The issue is, should women be paid the same amount of money as men for the same work? That's the
for the same work. I agree.
Excuse me, Steve. That's the only question on the table. And then when we had the Lilly Ledbetter law that came up before the Congress to provide women with the opportunity to get pay equity and to sue if they weren't getting paid equity, the Republicans almost unanimously voted against the Lilly Ledbetter law.
Yeah, but that's
Democrats
so manufactured. Could we explain to the public what the Lilly Ledbetter law is? And I think it proves my point how manufactured it is. The Democrats tried to make it sound that this Lilly Ledbetter law was going to for the first time ever, give women the right to sue an employer for discrimination. That's not true. They always had the right. They still had the right. This was a question of statute of limitations. When does it start? Does the statute of limitations start at the payment of the first check or the last check? And it has always been that it was the first check. There was an attempt to change it to the last check, and reasonable minds can agree or disagree.
The Supreme Court upheld discriminating against Lily Ledbetter, who's an actual living woman, who brought a lawsuit saying she has the right to sue for pay equity. The Supreme Court ruled against her, and it took an act of Congress to overcome our new conservative Supreme Court. And the issue is, there shouldn't be an issue about that. Why do the Republicans engage in making this an issue of discrimination against women?
It's not. It was all about the statute of limitations. You had the same thing. You had the same thing, Robert. Well, you had the same thing when it came to, sexual offenses against children and how long should the statute of limitations. I mean, we can have an argument. Maybe we shouldn't have a statute of limitations for anything like murder. The reason you have statute of limitations is because people die, memories fade, people wander off, witnesses aren't around.
That wasn't the case with the Lily Ledbetter law. It was very clear evidence, and the only defense the corporation had against her was that, the statute expired. Well, you know something? That's not good enough.
Well, either you have a statute of limitations or you don't, right?
No,
so should we just abolish the statute of limitations in every case?
Fortunately, the Democrats in Congress did do that, and the president signed into law saying that in a matter of an issue like this with Lily Ledbetter, when it comes to pay equity, that's preeminent.
You said fortunately, so we should have acts of Congress to do away with the statute of limitations of cases of women, but keep it in every other case, or should we abolish the statute of limitations in all other cases?
We're saying that when we use statute of limitations to discriminate against women, to deny them pay equity, those should be gotten rid of. That's what Congress said. That's what the president said. And very frankly, if you look at election after election, women are fed up with Republicans saying, we don't believe in big government except when it comes to intruding in your personal lives. Look at the Personhood Amendment that Governor Huckabee and Governor Romney supported that outlawed certain types of contraceptions because they felt that was inappropriate. Look at the idea of blocking funding for Planned Parenthood. You know who was the author of supporting financing for birth control rights for women, primarily for women who are indigent? It was George Herbert Walker Bush, because he said when women who can't afford birth control are denied it, it creates a public health crisis.
Now, wait a minute. I'm a pro-choice guy. I'm a pro-choice guy. And we're not just talking.
Governor Huckabee.
We're not just talking. I'm not defending Huckabee. I'm saying how the media took him out of context. But I'm not. Listen, I don't have a problem with contraception for poor people. That's not what the Sandra Fluke thing was all about. Excuse me. What that was all about, again, was a manufactured issue that we should have free contraception within insurance. Hey, I don't think Viagra should be paid for
By the way,
out of insurance.
Not free because we pay for insurance.
Of course we do, but then it's subsidized. Free. Everyone else's rates go up. If you're poor, it's one thing. But look, this is what I mean about war on women. Listen, you know what a war on women is? We all know who Malala was, right? Malala, this 15-year-old girl from Pakistan, gets shot in the head for going around saying women in Afghanistan should be able to learn and not exclude. That's a war on women. In India and China, where they're aborting women because they feel that they will be a drain, that's a war on women. This other stuff is nonsense manufactured stuff.
There are lots of ways you declare war without firing a bullet. And when you, in fact, block women's right to reproductive health, when you block their right to pay equity, when you block their right to justice if they're gay.
There's no blocking of pay equity. That's what I mean. It's a manufactured issue. The real war against women is what you're seeing in these other countries where they can't get an education. You see them stoned for having an affair. It's absolutely...
That is the reason women have walked away from the Republican Party, especially suburban Republican women in droves. In the last 6 presidential elections, Democrats have won the vote 5 of the last 6 times.
You're right. Listen, I agree with you. And I think the reason is the Democrats have been better at really exploiting this issue, as they've done here, as they do with all of the little factions within the electorate that they break out, and then we get into the whole, well, what is this doing to the economy when we pit one section against the other? And I want to weave
Actually,
Mike
it strengthens
Watt.
the economy when we provide more job opportunities for women, and women.
Well,
and
let's see what it does to
fairly.
business. All right, let's see what it does to businesses. Where now there's so much regulation on businesses that we have one of the worst job markets that we've ever seen in this country. And I want to segue into Mike Watt. You know, Mike, another thing that was talked about in the State of the State was the president's desire to push out unemployment benefits beyond the 99 weeks. Now, some will say, good idea. Others will say, hey, you know, it was 26 weeks, then it was 52 weeks. At what point do you say, okay, this is now becoming an entitlement? We have to say enough.
Well, yeah, you reach a point where it becomes counterproductive. If people are getting paid for doing nothing versus getting them out and getting them working, 99 weeks should be enough time to get back into the flow of things. But I kind of want to go back real quick to what Robert was saying. Women doing equal work should get equal pay. That's just bottom line. It's a shame that we would need government.
And I don't disagree. Equal work, equal pay.
And it's a shame that we would need government intervention. But I just got to throw this out there. You know, where does what transpired in the New York State Assembly with the sexual harassment, the rampant sexual harassment that was going on by certain Democratic assemblymen, and where does that fit under the war with women? Because I think that's an absolute disgrace that New York State taxpayers had to pay over $100,000 to push things under the carpet. Where if that was a private sector case, that would have been people would have gone to jail.
Completely agreed. Completely agree. It's not a partisan issue. Whenever there's sexual harassment or sexual discrimination, it should offend everyone, especially any form of it at all, whether it's towards women, whether it's towards the gay community. We should all be united in our disgust with that behavior.
Yeah, and yet Shelley Silver is still in charge. I just don't understand that why he wasn't held more accountable for what took place on his watch on a variety of different occasions.
I know we saw Rand Paul try to bring this up again. I thought Rand Paul was a bit out of line, you know, bringing up President Clinton on this. But again, he was making that same point of, you know, almost it seems like a double standard. But you've been very consistent with this, Robert, I know, in condemning that kind of activity.
Yeah, of course.
But let me dovetail into another thing in the State of the Union. That kind of just went over without much of a big deal. And by the way, folks, if you want to join us in this conversation, it's 451-1039. This is Steve Levy on Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. We have the very articulate Robert Zimmerman, a Democratic committeeman on the phone, a CNN contributor, and we have Michael Watt from Long Island Inc. here in the studio. One of the things that blew my mind in the State of the Union, in the First Lady's box was an illegal alien. And, of course, the president was talking about the DREAM Act and what he's going to be doing to bring about immigration reform. And I saw a press conference, a press release the next day from members of Immigration and Custom Enforcement, the head of their organization, being outraged, saying, we've been trying for 2 years to get a meeting with you, Mr. President, about how you're forcing us to release people, not enforce the law. And now you tell us we can't have a meeting with you, but you can put a person who is here illegally in the box with the First Lady. I was offended by that. Now, I know I'm in the minority there.
I applauded it. Let me be clear. This president probably has in fact, certainly surpasses George W. Bush in terms of the record number of deportations he has put in place as president.
Which is a drop in the bucket.
Our border security has never been tighter. But we've got to move past this.
But the border security has nothing to do with who's coming in and out. It's been mostly because the economy has been so bad and the flow stopped for a while. When the economy cooks up, that's going to heat up again. But all right, go ahead.
He's increased border security. He's put forward a record number of deportations out of our country of those who are undocumented workers. But we have to be realistic about the fact that there are 11 million hardworking people who live in our country. They're undocumented workers. We have to find a pathway for citizenship.
Why do you have to? Why do you have to create a pathway to citizenship for people who came here illegally, Mike?
Because we're a nation of immigrants. I got to agree with Robert on this one. We're a nation of immigrants.
Of legal immigrants.
You know something, Steve? Yes, they came here. They came here for, like all of the other immigrants, they came here for a better life for their families and a better future for themselves. That's true. Did they come here? Did they come here illegally? Many of them did. They're not the first group that ever came here illegally.
Correct, but you have 6 billion other people around the world who want to come here legally and ill. Should we just say yes? Anyone who wants to come in, come in?
No, that's why we've got to increase border security without question. But the reality is,
why don't you just enforce E-Verify?
Excuse me, Steve. We cannot deport 11 million undocumented.
Nobody says you should.
And so the reality is,
but they'd leave if they didn't get the job.
I'm sorry?
They would leave if they couldn't get the job if you enforced E-Verify. The illegal immigration issue can be solved immediately by people in government on both sides of the aisle. Neither one of them want to. The Democrats want the votes, and the Republicans want the cheap labor. If they just enforced E-Verify, not only going forward prospectively, but retroactively, the problem is solved. People who can't get jobs will go back home. You don't have to put them on yellow buses to go home.
Steve, let's remember, these people who now have families they're raising here, whose children are in school here, are not just picking up and going
What
home.
about people who've been waiting online for 10 years?
Absolutely. I'm not saying the system's fair, which is why it has to be reformed. And the reality, too, when you look at the issue of the cheap labor, there's no question people are being underpaid, especially undocumented workers, but they're taking jobs that nobody else wants.
Baloney. They're taking jobs that would be taken by Americans if you pay them a fair wage. Would prices go up? Yeah. Would you have to pay people more? Yeah. But Americans have always been willing to take a job if you pay them the right wage. Why would an employer pay a person that wage if you have someone who will take far, far less than that? Mike, I know you disagree with me on this. Let me have it.
Well, here's the thing. And Robert's exactly right. They're taking jobs that we don't want to do. I mean, our teenagers aren't cutting grass anymore. Our teenagers aren't bussing tables anymore. And
they will for the right price, I maintain.
Don't kid yourself. Our teenagers, and very frankly, ask any store owner, any restaurant owner, they can't get people at $12 or $15 an hour. Don't kid yourself on that front.
You can if you pay the right amount, but I think we're all in agreement that we should have more legal immigration. And if you have a void, like out on our farms, they used to have a system where, you'd come in as a migrant worker legally and then you leave. There should be more of that, and I think we're all in agreement that it's too easy to get in here illegally and too hard to get in here legally.
And the reality is, until we reform the system, which the rules are so broken with immigration, nobody really knows what the rules are. They're enforced arbitrarily. It really
that's by design.
Right.
They're forced arbitrarily because they don't want to enforce the law because they're winking and nodding with each other.
The rules themselves are incredibly contradictory.
Well, they are too difficult to get in the right way. Let's shift gears here. We've got the Boston bomber who was just convicted, and surprisingly, Eric Holder calls for the death penalty. I happen to agree with him in this particular case. If ever there was a case for the death penalty, it's this case.
Right.
Robert, what do you think? Is your Attorney General wrong?
Absolutely right. And I'm someone who historically has been opposed to the death penalty. But when it comes to terrorists and terrorist behavior, there's no question. The death penalty should be enforced. I think Attorney General Holder made the right decision.
Would you say that if it was Attorney General, John Ashcroft?
Oh, absolutely.
You're taking the wind out of my sails here, Robert.
No, all right, I'll jump in. I'll disagree. I don't see the purpose that's served by using the death penalty here. To me, you're lowering yourself to their standards and you're making a martyr of this young man.
I don't agree. We're holding them. We're having a trial. He's going to have legal representation. Our democratic judicial process is moving forward. But there's a price you pay for engaging in terrorist activities that should be the highest price one should pay.
Right, and to me, the highest price you pay is a lifelong imprisonment versus making a martyr out of him by killing him and reducing your society to their level. Because you got to understand, these people do not value life. They do not value. They see death as something glorious, and causing other people's death is just even more glorious.
Remember something. Yeah. This guy who's up for trial, who's the Boston bomber. He didn't kill himself. If he thought death was so glorious, he would have taken his own life when he had the chance. Quite to the contrary, he chose to stay alive.
Hey, let me ask you one more thing here, Robert. We got about 2 minutes to go. I said before how I think Democrats are carving up the election. They do this very well with the African-American vote as well. And what I saw is with you mentioned it yourself, the Voting Rights Act, or Republicans are trying to take away the right to vote for minority citizens. And I think that's a bunch of bunk as well. What the Supreme Court said in that Voting Rights Act was, hey, the southern states, these 7 or 8 southern states, no longer had to go through the federal government to pass the most mundane election law. They weren't saying that, you can now bring back a poll tax or you have to have a literacy exam. But that's exactly what the Democrats are pumping out there.
Steve, that's exactly what's happening around the country.
Oh, come on.
Every state, whether it's Pennsylvania or whether it's in the southern region of our country, when you have a Republican governor or a Republican legislature, are passing rules to make it tougher to vote.
Like what? For
example, they're requiring you have to have a driver's license.
Oh, my God. Were you at the Democratic Convention, Robert Zimmerman? Were you at the Democratic Convention in North Carolina in 2012?
I was indeed.
Did you have to show your ID to get in? Yes, you did.
Absolutely, I did.
Okay, come on. Give me a break.
That's different. There's no comparison. When you go to vote, that's a right every American has.
And if you want to get social services, you've got to show ID. So why is it you have to show social services and ID on those, but not to vote?
When you require someone to show proof of identity when they go to vote, which is not, you're requiring someone to spend the money for a driver's license. And
no, it's done for free.
No, not free.
Oh, it absolutely
is. That's incorrect because, Steve, in order to get that identification for free, you've first got to pay for a birth certificate. Many people have to drive down to take time off.
They do it when you want to get welfare. That somehow you can do it.
It's a tax you're putting on people's right to vote, and this is a process. And by the way, once again, it's why the Republicans remain a party that's becoming increasingly irrelevant in national elections.
The Republicans are controlling the governorships in all of these, in a majority of states and many legislatures. But I'll tell you, the Democrats are lucky for one thing, Robert Zimmerman. That they got a guy like you, as articulate as you, as their advocate. You're good. You're good.
I give it my best.
Well, listen, thanks for joining us, Rob. We hope we'll have you back because this was spirited.
Best of luck with the show.
And Mike Watts, thank you
very
buddy.
much. My pleasure.
We want you back, Mike, to talk about things that are happening here on Long Island. You've been a big force in trying to keep our young people here. Continued success with your Links project.
Thank you very much.
Long Island Incorporated. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to see you back again next week on Speak Out Long Island, your radio talk show. Take care. See you next week.